This is a street called Hope. It links two great cathedrals, the Anglican and the Metropolitan Cathedral of Christ the King. And these two fine-looking gentlemen are Archbishop Derek Worlock and the Reverend David Sheppard. You can bring these two buildings together with a street, but how do you bring people together? Well, these two Liverpool heroes did, and this is where we remember them. Of course, great structures can make up a city, but the real heartbeat lies within the people. And like any city throughout its history, there have been unassuming heroes and some terrible villains. I'm Frank Carlyle, and I'm not a hero, and I'm certainly not a villain, but I love my city and I love sharing its history with you. The Albert Dock, full of tourists, full of children, playing, being educated by the school trips. Going back to the 19th century, it was a very, very dangerous place to be, and it involved kids as well. Why would children pose such a threat in the 19th century? Charles Dickens, who we mentioned before, stood right here as a special constable observing criminals at work. The criminals under his observation were young boys known as the 40 Thieves. This is how the 40 Thieves did it. They surrounded their hapless victims and they moved in very quickly, taking everything away from them. The victims in some cases were left destitute and ended up in the workhouses. This child gang were like piranha as they homed in on easy prey. But who were the easy prey? They were migrants waiting here on the quayside. Ironically, from the hope of a better life in the New World, America in particular, to the hardship of workhouses that Dickens himself so deplored. The child gang of the 40 Thieves became the catalyst for Fagin's gang and Oliver Twist. It's hard to imagine that such young boys could ruin the lives of people trying to make a better life for themselves. Isn't it funny the way things turn round? You'd never come here because it was too dangerous. But look at it now. The child gang of the 40 Thieves, therefore, were the ruination of so many people's lives. That's why they're on the list of Liverpool villains. From the 40 Thieves to two pioneering heroes, father and son, James and Windham Sadler. They sound like actors, don't they, with the names like that? But they weren't, let me tell you. It was right here that an amazing feat had taken place in April 1817. This is the new Chavash Park, and way back in 1784, James Sadler became the very first British aeronaut to ascend in a balloon. There was one thing that James Sadler wanted to do, and try as he might, he could never do it, and that was cross an expanse of water, because other balloonists, no matter where they came from, wouldn't dare try to cross an expanse of water. James Sadler tried and tried and tried. However, he always failed to cross from Liverpool to Dublin. And getting on in years, he eventually gave up his quest. And his son, Windham Sadler, promised his dad. He said, "Dad, I'll do it for you. And I'll do it, and I'll do it now." Windham took his dad's flowcharts and he studied them intensely. And instead of crossing from Liverpool to Dublin and failing, Windham decided to cross from Dublin to Liverpool. In April 1817, Windham Sadler ascended from Dublin in his balloon and successfully crossing the Irish Sea. From his great pioneering feat of 1817 to a disaster in 1823 when Windham Sadler's balloon crashed on the moors near Blackburn, and he's buried in Christ Church Cemetery here in Liverpool. He is one of the true Liverpool heroes. On October the 16th, 1883, there were two sisters known as the Black Widows, and they were arrested and charged with at least 4 murders. Today, they'd be known as serial killers. The two sisters, Catherine Flannagan and Margaret Higgins, were urged on by sheer greed. They lived around the Scotland Road area, Skirving Street, Latimer Street, and finally Ascot Street. In 1883, people did not move around. They stayed there for life. So what were these two sisters trying to hide? Could it be the fact that family members and lodgers went missing? So, who were the victims of the Black Widows? John Flannagan, 21 years of age, the son of Catherine Flannagan. Thomas Higgins, the husband of Margaret Higgins. Mary Higgins, aged 10, the stepdaughter of Margaret Higgins. Margaret Jennings, 18 years of age, a lodger. Each victim was slowly poisoned and died in agony. The deceased, Thomas Higgins' brother, Patrick Higgins, had thought something afoot here, because he was very sharp. And what had happened, he found out that his brother, Thomas, had been heavily insured for £150. He informed the police in turn informed the coroner, and the coroner had stopped the funeral right away. 150 quid doesn't sound much today, but in those days, 1883, it would buy you 2 terraced houses. Police ordered the other bodies to be exhumed, and after the autopsy, they found out that every single one of them had died in the same way. They were poisoned. After the arrest of both Catherine Flannagan and Margaret Higgins, it was here on the 14th of February 1884 at St George's Hall they stood trial. And isn't it such an intimidating place? The trial had lasted 3 days, and the jury found them guilty. And it was from here that they were led to the holding cell, awaiting their fate. And this was the holding cell that the both sisters, the Black Widows, Catherine Flannagan and Margaret Higgins, had to wait and then brought up to Kirkdale Jail. The cell itself looked very basic, nicely whitewashed walls. But believe you me, in 1884, when they were condemned to die, these cells were a horrible green colour. Dank, wet, vermin running around. So you can imagine the two women sitting here, waiting to be taken away. Here's something. What if they wanted to spend their last penny of the insurance money? Have a look at this. It's a loo. But it's no ordinary loo. What's missing? Well, I'll tell you what's missing. It's the chain, just in case you want to. Couldn't have that in a condemned cell. And there's the flush when they had to use it. When they were taken from here to Kirkdale Jail, the most notorious in Europe, in fact, Lubyanka in Russia was actually based on Kirkdale Jail. And it was there on the 3rd of March 1884 that both Catherine Flannagan and Margaret Higgins were hanged side by side in Kirkdale's execution shed during a snowstorm. And there ends the sad story of the two Scotland Road Black Widows. This is the Cathedral of Christ the King, and it seems like a second home, along with the Anglican Cathedral. But every time I come here, we seem to learn a lot more history, and none more so than a person that was actually born on this site. People sometimes term loosely individuals as heroes. So what does an individual have to do to become such a hero? Let's go back in time and picture this scene. Thunder and lightning, a young girl running through the streets of Liverpool, heavily pregnant, banging on the wakehouse door right here. The door opened. The authorities didn't realise that this girl was heavily pregnant. She collapsed, and unfortunately she died. But she was given birth at the same time. And when she gave birth, the authorities panicked because the lady died. They thought that the child had died as well, so they rushed him over to the chapel where they baptised him, because obviously they thought that he was going to die. And they baptised him John, after the Baptist. And they gave him the old Anglo-Saxon word, kirk, meaning church. So this young boy became John Kirk. And John Kirk, his birth was actually the catalyst for Charles Dickens's Oliver Twist, because Oliver Twist, he was born in a workhouse to a mother who died, and Charles Dickens read this particular report, and as I said, it put the seed in his head. And who was Oliver Twist's benefactor? It was none other than Mr. Brownlow, his paternal grandfather, hence Brownlow Hill Workhouse. But what happened to John Kirk? John Kirk escaped certain death because workhouses at that time were an absolutely dreadful place to be placed in. Because the only time that you ever came out to freedom was feet first, because you were tied to the workhouse for the rest of your natural life. John Kirk escaped the workhouse, and what an incredible life story he had.
What happened to Kirk was an extraordinary true story. He somehow got to Lincoln. No one knows how he got to Lincoln, by the way. He just all of a sudden happened to turn up there, and he joined the army. Now don't forget, in those days it was hand to mouth, and that hand to mouth, you had to do something. And he was just a young boy, a young man, and he joined the Lincolnshire Regiment. He became a drummer boy, then he progressed to being a bugler, and from there, obviously, a rifleman. He was sent over to India, and it was the Raj, belonging to the British Empire. And during the 1857 Indian Uprising, what he did, he volunteered along with 2 sergeants to go and rescue the captain of the regiment, the captain's wife, children, servants. So he volunteered along with the 2 sergeants and went, and he actually fought hand-to-hand combat 2,000 Punjabis, just these few men. And they actually got the captain, his wife, children, servants to safety. And he was awarded the Victoria Cross along with the 2 sergeants. But he never got it right away. He had to wait a further 3.5 years until November 1860. And if you could imagine, in that time, this man was suffering from a debilitating disease called narcolepsis. He was also suffering from rheumatoid arthritis. So this man was in pain anyway. In November 1860, he was court-martialed just prior to receiving his Victoria Cross. They couldn't execute him because any menial offence, if you're court-martialed, you were executed. As an example for the army. But unfortunately for the army, they couldn't execute him because in a few days' time he was actually going to receive his Victoria Cross off the Queen herself, Victoria. He stood for 12 solid hours, 48 hours after being punished, because they had to punish him, and they gave him 50 lashes. And he stood there waiting for his Victoria Cross off the Queen. She knew nothing at all about the punishment. All she knew that she was going to present this brave man. She came, She gave him the Victoria Cross, congratulated him. She walked away. After she disappeared, he was marched by 2 officers through the portals. This is Buckingham Palace, where he was stripped of his uniform, stripped of his medal, dishonourably discharged, and he was left destitute. Less than 2 minutes after receiving his Victoria Cross. He made his way back to Liverpool. Now, why he made his way back to Liverpool is this. He never, ever, ever forgot his mother. He always wanted to know what his proper name was. So he made his way back to his spiritual home, which was Brownlow Hill Workhouse. He got back, finally got back. Banged on the door like his mother did. Unfortunately, he was in such pain because of his 50 lashes, still suffering from rheumatoid arthritis. He was brought through, readmitted, brought through the dormitories, where he lay down on his bed and died. And that's the extraordinary story of Liverpool's first recipient of the Victoria Cross. Now, what I'm going to say now is that allegedly he was drunk on parade. However, if we look at it more closely, with that debilitating disease called narcolepsis, where you slur your speech and you stagger, he could have easily been suffering then and not being drunk on parade. But unfortunately, he was court-martialed for it.
For people who have followed the Liverpool Unravelled series, here's a piece of Liverpool unnoticed. So you've lived in Liverpool all your life and you think you know your own city. Well, what if someone asked you to point them in the right direction for a little piece of Egypt? Where would you tell them to go? Well, right here is the little piece of Egypt when you look at this. We haven't only got one Sphinx, we have 4, and they're right here on the grounds of Liverpool University. And imagine this, if Liverpool had its own parliament, this is the building I'd choose to represent Liverpool and its MPs. So come with me and have a look inside. If this was the Houses of Parliament and you were here on May the 11th, 1812, you would have heard 2 shots ring out. Bang, bang! There was deafening silence, and then chaos broke out. MPs started to realise that Spencer Perceval, the Prime Minister, had just been shot. Not only had been shot, he'd been fatally wounded. Two questions have to be answered. Why would anybody want to assassinate the British Prime Minister, Spencer Perceval? And second, who? Intellectuals like the poets Wordsworth and Blake really thought that this was the first shot of the revolution. Of course it wasn't, but there was one man who had a revolt against the British establishment, and in particular, our British Prime Minister, Spencer Perceval. The assassin was John Bellingham of Duke Street, Liverpool. We have to go back in time to the events leading up to May the 11th, 1812, and that tragic day, because John Bellingham actually traded with Russia, and his Russian agent went bankrupt. And unfortunately for Bellingham, he was thrown into a debtor's prison here, where he spent a few months. On his release, he came out, but went straight over to Russia, where he ordered the Russian government to pay him compensation. Unfortunately for Bellingham, he was thrown in jail there. And on his release from there, he had this terrible, terrible angst against the British government, and in particular, Spencer Perceval. And when he got no joy at all from the British government, because he wanted compensation off them, and unfortunately for him, he was getting no compensation off anybody. He even wrote to the Prince Regent. Prince Regent wrote back saying, "I'm sorry, I can't help." So therefore, what Bellingham did, he acquired 2 pistols, and the plot manifested. Bellingham, on the 11th of May, 1812, went to the Houses of Parliament, and it was there that he jumped from behind a column as Spencer Perceval, the British Prime Minister, was walking down to take his seat, and he shot him. There were 2 local MPs who knew Bellingham. One was George Gascoigne, and the other, Bannister Tarleton. And it was they who apprehended Bellingham until he was arrested. Bellingham was tried and convicted of the crime and actually hanged at Newgate Prison exactly 1 week later on the 18th of May, 1812. We've only ever had one assassination of a British Prime Minister. Through sheer frustration and circumstance, Bellingham became the ultimate in political villainy by assassinating the British Prime Minister, Spencer Perceval. Time for our next hero. And when this man's name is mentioned in the Everton area, it's just oh, what a great fella he was. His name, Dr. Jerome Connolly. Dr. Connolly came from Ireland in 1936 into Liverpool, and he walked into the Everton area where he saw terrible, terrible deprivation. Kids walking around in bare feet. And what springs to mind? Those Barefoot Days, the song. But it was a terrible time for these kids. Back-to-back terracing, cellars, courts. And he said then, I'm going to help these people. And don't forget that this was long before the welfare state. What did he do? He waived his fees, he helped children with malnutrition, helped children with other diseases such as rickets, And also people had great pride then, you know, albeit that they couldn't afford anything. And yet what did this man do, Dr. Connolly? He used to leave some money on the mantelpiece so that they could buy food, using his anonymity. So people still had pride and dignity. World War II broke out in September 1939, and Dr. Connolly immediately enlisted into the British Army, into the medical corps. Unfortunately, in 1944, during the Anzio landings, he was actually captured. But that didn't keep Dr. Connolly incarcerated. He escaped, and he escaped into the Apennines, where the Italian partisans were fighting the Germans. And what did he do there? He helped people with malnutrition, he helped the wounded, he even helped to deliver babies. He became a cult figure to the Italians. And they said, this Englishman with the red hair, and very, very politely he said, no, I'm not actually English, I'm Irish, because he was a very proud Irishman. Unfortunately, he was recaptured and he was sent to Berlin, where he lost a considerable amount of weight. And when the war was over, obviously, Dr. Connolly was repatriated back to Liverpool, and he got off the train at Lime Street Station, where his partner in his practice, which was in Juvenile Street, greeted him. But Dr. Goldberg didn't recognise him, because he was very, very, very thin, skeleton-like. And Dr. Goldberg just put his arms around him and said, he said, I'm so glad that you're back home, because Dr. Connolly shouted him, just didn't recognise him. And he said, I've got some bad news, Jerome. And he said, what's that? Our practice has been bombed during the May Blitz. And Dr. Connolly just laughed, because, you know, the irony is that he was incarcerated by the Germans, and yet they still bombed the practice, which was, you know, it was ironic. But this man survived. In fact, he became one of the most popular doctors of the Everton area. And in fact, he was my doctor. And he still left his great legacy here, because he married a Dr. Catherine Foley. They had 7 children, and the majority of them are doctors today around the world. I even know one of them who's a flying doctor in Australia. And as you can hear the plane above, you know, is that a sign? But it's absolutely wonderful to think that myself personally, I'm still a member of his family's doctors, because Dr. Renton is still in the practice that he left to the community of Everton. Thousands of people walk past this building every day, and it's Dr. Connolly's practice. And let me show you the plaque with Dr. Connolly's name still proudly written upon it. And here is his legacy for the Everton community, and his name proudly displayed on the building itself. And always remember, when you're passing, the doctor, the Irish doctor with the flaming red hair. from liverbirds to super lamb bananas. Now there are newer residents here, but not everybody liked them. There was controversy. People were saying, half a lamb, half a banana, what's going on? Now they're part of our history simply because our people, the city of Liverpool, love them. In 100 years' time, we'll still be talking about the super lamb bananas because they'll be part of our history and heritage. For every up, there's a downside in our history. So let's move on to our next villain, and it's happened on this very site. And this is it, Tower Building. But this is today's Tower Building, and what represents up there are the three towers that have stood there since 1301. And that's where Colonel Birch comes into the equation, because he was garrisoned and imprisoned in the first tower. So who was this Colonel Birch? Well, we have to go back to the English Civil War and the unusual tale of this man. Between May and June 1644, the Liverpool castle was garrisoned by Colonel Moore, a parliamentarian. And Prince Rupert came up to relieve the parliamentarians for the royalist cause. After 18 days of bloody battle, Prince Rupert finally broke through the stranglehold of Moore and his troops and took the castle. Moore fled along with his troops to the Isle of Man, and now the royalists garrisoned the castle. Most parliamentarians were imprisoned in the Tower Building, and one of them was Colonel Birch. Colonel Birch was taken from the Tower by the Earl of Derby, because there had been a long-standing feud between them. And he was taken, tied to the underneath of a hay cart, and he was dragged through the streets of Liverpool in one of the most humiliating ways man could endure. And it was through this that Birch always had a revengeful outlook. The royalists didn't hold on to the castle that long, because in November 1644, the parliamentarians retook the castle. And this is where Colonel Birch, who was then made governor of Liverpool in 1648, he took revenge. But it wasn't against the Earl himself, it was against his two children, two young boys. And he had them brought down to where he was imprisoned by the Earl, to the Tower, where he made them crawl around on all fours and beg for food like dogs. They couldn't talk. They weren't allowed to talk, but only bark. It was there that those two young boys were held for 18 months, barking for food. To take revenge against children and humiliate them the way he did makes him a revengeful coward, one of the worst villains in Liverpool history. This is the Collegiate of Shaw Street, a very famous place of learning. Today, there are fancy apartments, but at least it's still here. And just around the corner from the Collegiate is its neighbour, SFX, St Francis Xavier's School. And the two of them, the two wonderful buildings, are linked to our next hero. It's a funny place, Liverpool. You'll always find a place of tranquility, and this is Whiteley Gardens here on Shore Street. Peace, birds singing, beautiful day. Now that's what George Gabriel Coury longed for in the trenches during the 1914-18 conflict. George Gabriel Coury, born Liverpool in 1896, and he was educated at St Francis Xavier School, Salisbury Street, then at Stonyhurst College, Ribble Valley. Now, he was an apprentice in the cotton trades in the Albany in Old Hall Street, and when war broke out on the 4th of August 1914, he was commissioned into the Pioneer Corps as a second lieutenant. The pioneers, what's the definition of the pioneers? They never get the credit that they richly deserve. Now what the pioneers did, they actually repaired the roads. They went out into no man's land and dug the trenches for an advancement of the Allies, brought the ammunition up, even the barbed wire. The pioneers' job was really hazardous because they came under immense fire continually. And on the 8th of August 1916, at a place known as Arrowhead Copse near Julemont, the Battle of the Somme was raging. Coury and his men advanced into no man's land under heavy enemy fire to dig trenches for the advancement of Allied troops. He completed his mission, but with heavy casualties and the wounding of a CO. He went out again into machine gun swept no man's land in order to bring back his wounded CO. In broad daylight, in full view of the enemy, an extreme heavy fire, he brought back his commanding officer. This conspicuous gallantry earned Coury a Victoria Cross. He was promoted to full lieutenant from second lieutenant. He was transferred from his regiment to the Royal Flying Corps as a pilot and promoted to captain. So what happened to George Gabriel Coury? Well, he survived the war. He came back to Liverpool and he wanted to go back into his own cotton business in Old Hall Street, but unfortunately that had collapsed. So he had no job. So what did he do to provide for his family? He opens a chippy called the Chip Pan around the corner from St Francis Xavier School, his old school, Brunswick Road. And there he was, happy as Larry, serving his customers with his fish and chips. Then the Second World War broke out and he enlisted yet again. And what did he do? He actually landed on the 6th of June 1944, D-Day. What a survivor this man was. Survived the First World War, the Second World War, and finally he did get his call. And in 1956 he died, and he's buried at St Peter's and Paul, Crosby. This is the old, now defunct royal infirmary. During the mid-19th century, parts of Liverpool were suffering from such terrible diseases as cholera, dysentery, typhoid. Liverpool philanthropist William Rathbone had seen such apathy in the poorer districts of Liverpool. With no medical help in these poorer districts, the poor people had to fend for themselves. William Rathbone had taken the initiative to bring in medical help to these poor wretches. He sent for a nurse named Agnes Jones, a caring, modest woman, and he was willing to pay her. Her dedication to caring for the sick and the poor was exemplary. Agnes Jones went straight into the poorer districts and even came here to the Royal, where she washed the walls down with lime to kill James. Ironically, going in to help these poor wretches, the poor people played a part in her death because she died of cholera while she was treating these people. A dedication and a sacrifice ended their life. Albeit that she was a Cambridge girl and she died here in Liverpool sacrificing her life, she wasn't buried here. Her body was taken over to Ireland where she's interred today. And people from here and all over the country actually go over to Ireland and put flowers on her grave. And we're very proud to have this Cambridge girl as one of Liverpool's heroes. Black widows, 40 thieves, men in balloons, wartime feats of incredible bravery. The echoes of the past and the shadows of what has gone before us are all around. I wonder what the future has in store for this amazing city. I'd prefer more heroes, and I'm sure you would too. All right. Behind. Oh yeah. Oh, hello, Mr. Shields. How are you, mate? William Rathbone had taken the initiative. And you're moaning to me about getting it done, right?
Oh, hello, Mr. Shields. Just get it done. Just get it done.
Windham, Sadler. Off. Did you hear that?
What was it?
The big noise. Did you get us in? No. Was it okay?
Yeah.
Therefore, Agnes Jones, through a dedication and a sacrifice, has become...
Don't worry, don't let them bother you, Frank. Don't let them bother you.